If there's one financial story that both amazes and confuses the world, it's how the United States prints, lends, and buys its own money. A system that sounds impossible, where a government can fund itself with money created out of thin air, and somehow the entire world still accepts it as the standard of value. But how can a nation borrow from itself, pay debts with money it just created, and still be seen as the most trusted economy on earth? To understand this paradox, we must begin with a truth that's often misunderstood. Money today is not gold, it's debt. When you hold a dollar in your hand, you're not holding a piece of wealth. You're holding a promise, a contract issued by the US government that says, this note has value as long as you believe it does. And that belief, not gold, not silver, is what keeps the system alive. After every financial crisis, from the Great Depression of 1929 to the meltdown of 2008, people ask the same question: how does America always find the money to save itself? The answer is both simple and terrifying. They don't find it, they create it. The Federal Reserve, known simply as the Fed, isn't just a central bank. It's the most powerful financial engine ever built, able to create dollars with a single digital entry. When the Fed buys government bonds, it doesn't use gold or even cash. It simply adds new numbers to a bank's account. And just like that, money is born. Not from mines, not from trade, but from a keystroke. That's the secret heartbeat of modern America, a loop where the government borrows, the Fed buys, and the people believe. It's a self-sustaining cycle until belief itself starts to break. Because here's the haunting question at the center of it all. Can a system built entirely on trust survive forever? To understand how the United States can print money without collapsing, we have to travel back to the early 20th century, a time when every dollar was still backed by gold. In those days, each paper bill represented a specific amount of gold stored safely in government vaults. This was known as the gold standard, a system built on the promise that money could be exchanged for real metal. For nearly a century, the world trusted that rule. Money was gold, and gold was money. No one could create value out of thin air. But everything changed in 1913, when the United States created the Federal Reserve. For the first time, the U.S. handed one institution the extraordinary power to issue money without gold immediately backing it. At first, the Fed was meant to stabilize the banking system, but then came World War I, and America needed money fast. To fund the war, the government issued bonds, and the Fed bought them with newly created dollars. That was the first time in history the U.S. borrowed from itself. After the war, the world realized something shocking. Money could be printed faster than gold could be mined. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement crowned the U.S. dollar as the centerpiece of the global financial system. 44 nations agreed the dollar would be tied to gold, 1 ounce of gold turned into 35 U.S. dollars, and all other currencies would be tied to the dollar. With massive gold reserves at Fort Knox, America became the banker of the world. But that power came at a price. To maintain its global influence, the U.S. had to spend on wars, aid, and politics. Each time it did, more dollars were printed, while the gold supply barely moved. By the early 1970s, other nations began to notice. French President Charles de Gaulle openly accused the U.S. of printing paper to buy real gold. France demanded payment in gold, and tons of it were shipped overseas. Facing a drain on reserves, President Richard Nixon made a shocking announcement in 1971. The dollar would no longer be redeemable for gold. Overnight, the foundation of global finance changed forever. That moment marked the birth of a new era, the era of fiat money, backed not by metal, but by belief. From then on, the value of the dollar was no longer guaranteed by gold, but by the economic strength and political stability of the United States, and by the world's collective faith that America would never default. But that faith came with a dangerous gift. For the first time, the U.S. government could spend without limit. No gold, no restraint, only political will, and the world's willingness to believe. Since abandoning gold, the United States has entered a financial era unlike any other in human history. An era where money isn't earned or mined, it's created by decision. This seemingly complex mechanism actually revolves around 3 key players: The U.S. Treasury, the arm of government that issues debt through Treasury bonds. The Federal Reserve, the powerful entity that can buy that debt by creating new money. The public and investors are who believe in and use the system every single day. Here's how it works. When the government needs to spend more, say $1 trillion for infrastructure, welfare, or war, it doesn't raise taxes right away. Instead, it issues Treasury bonds, promises to repay in the future, with interest. Banks, corporations, even foreign governments like China and Japan buy those bonds, giving the U.S. immediate cash. But here's the twist. When demand for bonds isn't enough, the Federal Reserve steps in. And to buy those bonds, the Fed doesn't dig up gold or move cash around. It simply creates new dollars electronically. With a few keystrokes, the Fed credits banks with newly created reserves. No printing press, no physical transaction, just numbers on a digital ledger, and suddenly, billions of dollars are born. This closed loop is what allows America to borrow, spend, and pay itself in its own currency. It's the core of modern monetary policy, known as quantitative easing, QE. Every time the Fed injects new money, interest rates drop. Lower interest rates mean more borrowing, more investment, and a rising stock market. It's a self-reinforcing cycle that makes everyone feel richer, for a while. But behind this miracle lies a dangerous truth. Every new dollar printed makes the old ones worth a little less. That's the silent cost of money creation, inflation. For the Federal Reserve, inflation is both a threat and a tool. A moderate amount erodes debt over time, making America's massive obligations feel lighter. But too much and the entire system trembles. Prices soar, wages stagnate, savings vanish. Here lies the paradox of American finance. The U.S. government can never truly go bankrupt. It can always print more dollars to pay what it owes. Yet each time it does, it quietly chips away at the world's trust in that very dollar. Like a patient reliant on painkillers, America has learned to survive each crisis by taking a stronger dose of monetary stimulus. From the dot-com bubble to the 2008 crash, from wars abroad to COVID relief at home, every rescue costs more, and every cure breeds the next addiction. The question is no longer, can the U.S. print money? But rather, how long can the world keep believing in the money it prints? By the time the 21st century began, the United States had mastered the art of money creation. But like any magic trick, it works only as long as the audience believes. The global economy is now built on a delicate illusion that the dollar's value is eternal, that U.S. debt is safe, and that the Federal Reserve can always fix any problem by adjusting interest rates or printing more money. For decades, this illusion worked perfectly. The U.S. printed money, the world accepted it. Nations traded in dollars, saved in dollars, and borrowed in dollars. The greenback became not just America's currency, but the world's currency. Every crisis only strengthened the illusion. When markets crashed, investors fled into the dollar, not away from it. During recessions, during wars, during pandemics, the dollar rose like a phoenix. It seemed invincible, but the cost of that illusion was quietly building. In 2008, after the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the U.S. government unleashed an unprecedented wave of money creation. Over $700 billion in bailouts, and later, trillions in quantitative easing. It saved Wall Street, but not Main Street. Banks recovered, ordinary people did not. This pattern repeated during the COVID-19 pandemic. To keep the economy alive, the Fed printed over $6 trillion in less than 2 years. Checks went out to citizens, markets soared, and inflation, which had been sleeping for decades, finally awoke. By 2022, prices were rising at the fastest pace in 40 years. For the first time, Americans began to ask uncomfortable questions. How can the government keep spending when it's already drowning in $30 trillion of debt? Where does the money really come from? And who pays the price? The answer, as always, is the people. Inflation is a hidden tax. It doesn't come in the form of a bill. It shows up at the grocery store, the gas station, the rent payment. Each new dollar printed reduces the buying power of the one already in your wallet. Meanwhile, the rich, those closest to the flow of new money, grow wealthier. Stock markets rise, asset prices inflate, and the gap between the financial elite and the working class widens into a canyon. Behind every stimulus package lies a trade-off. Short-term relief, long-term erosion. The dollar may not collapse tomorrow, but the foundation it stands on, trust, is cracking. And once that trust breaks, history shows us what happens next. Empires fall not when their armies are defeated, but when their money loses its meaning. The Roman denarius, the French assignat, the German mark, each began as a symbol of strength and ended as paper no one wanted. The US dollar still rules the world, but now for the first time in modern history, its throne no longer feels unshakable. Every empire in history has been built on three pillars: power, belief, and debt. And the story of America's money machine is no different. It is a story of brilliance, audacity, and danger, a balancing act between prosperity and collapse. Lesson 1. Money is no longer wealth, it's a promise. In the modern world, the dollar isn't backed by gold, oil, or land. It's backed by trust. When the government spends trillions it doesn't have, it's really borrowing from the future, from the unborn taxpayer, from the next generation's labor. This works only as long as people believe that tomorrow will be better than today. But once that faith fades, promises turn into panic. We've seen this movie before, in Rome, in Weimar, Germany, in Argentina. Money dies not because of numbers on a screen, but because people stop believing. Lesson 2. Printing money is easy. Stopping it is impossible. Each crisis teaches governments the same lesson. Printing works. It prevents collapse, buys votes, and postpones pain. But like a drug, it demands ever larger doses to feel the same effect. The dot-com bubble led to rate cuts. The housing crash led to quantitative easing. COVID led to trillions in stimulus. And the next crisis, whatever it is, will demand even more. Eventually, the system becomes addicted to money that doesn't exist. By the time withdrawal begins, the damage is already irreversible. Lesson 3. True power lies not in gold, but in control. The United States doesn't just print its own money, it prints the world's money. Through the Federal Reserve and the dominance of the dollar, it effectively controls the heartbeat of global finance. When the Fed raises interest rates, entire economies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America tremble. When it prints, global markets rise. When it stops, they fall. It's not an army that enforces this dominance. It's the invisible leash of credit and currency. That is the modern empire, one built not on swords, but on spreadsheets. Yet behind this power hides a dangerous question. What happens when belief in the dollar fades? Because unlike gold, belief cannot be mined or stored. Once it's gone, no printing press can bring it back. Today, as the world experiments with digital currencies, as China pushes the yuan into international trade, and as nations question the fairness of a dollar-dominated system, the foundation of American monetary supremacy faces its greatest test since 1971. Will the dollar survive another century? Probably, but not unchanged. It will evolve, digital, more controlled, more traceable. The question is not whether America can keep creating money, but whether it can keep the world believing in the story behind that money. Because in the end, all currencies are stories, and the dollar, the grandest story ever told, is still being written. Final reflection. When future historians look back on this era, they might not judge America for printing too much money, but for forgetting why money existed in the first place. Not as a weapon, not as a tool of manipulation, but as a bridge of trust between people. The collapse of that trust, not inflation, not debt, is what turns superpowers into footnotes in history. And if history whispers one last warning, it's this. Empires don't fall when they run out of gold. They fall when they run out of faith.